Ever wanted to put a brain back together? No? How about an AI brain that will act as your companion and have a lasting effect on your playthrough? Still no? You don't know what you want. Sit down and listen, okay? Okay. So the main mechanic I've added in this devlog is the dialogue system, but in doing so, I also updated the hacking system, since they both use the hacking device for the user interface. When creating the dialogue system, I knew I wanted the player's dialogue options to be in the hacking device, which limited me to only ever being able to have 3 options or less, but I also wanted to make it so the player only has an X amount of time to respond, meaning that he ultimately has up to 4 options to choose from, one of which being the frick all your options option. For the UI side of things, I first just copied the hacking UI and was going to have the dialogue UI be this completely separate thing. But I quickly realized that was pretty stupid, and all I needed to do was to just turn the background of the upper screen into a slider which was green when empty and red when full. This was definitely the right approach, given that I had already been planning on updating the hacking device to make it actually take some time to hack things. So now I could just use the new background slider for the hacking visual, and voila, 2 birds in 1 stone. I like the idea of the main character being completely mute, since humanity has long evolved past the needs for vocal cords. The game takes place very far into the future, where everyone has a brain chip implanted at birth, so people just communicate through them at a much faster pace than normal talking. But eventually human workers were bred with slower brain chips, essentially making them dumb, at least by that civilization's standards. And given that they can't talk, they have to use a bypass device that reads their brain chip and presents them with 3 options they can pick from. Given that there ended up being far more human workers than any other subspecies of humans, humanity had now essentially evolved backwards in terms of vocal communication. For now, the dialogue system is pretty much as simple as a multi-choice system can be. This little dialogue box pops up, showing the speaker's name and some text. Since the player has limited time to respond, I added another slider to the dialogue box that ticks down before the hacking device locks up into dialogue mode. This timer gives the player some heads up to minimize the potential frustration caused by the lockup, and also doubles as a handicap for those who generally just read slow. I'll make sure to have an adjustable read timer in the settings. So this game uses a lot of real-time lights, primarily for the flickering effect, and while it looks cool and atmospheric as hell, there's a reason most games use baked lighting. The performance hit from having so many real-time lights is pretty substantial, so I felt I should try and find some solution sooner than later. What I ended up doing was actually pretty simple. All I needed were 2 scripts and a few lines of code. I just disable resource-intensive game objects when they're far enough away from the player. And to make the script that handles this as performant as possible, I store as much of the logic I can at the very start of the game, and then have the script check the distance between all the objects once per second, instead of once per frame, for example. This method improved the FPS by even more than I expected, where I now have up to 100 more frames in some cases. The main story beat I worked on for this devlog was what I call the brain assembly. This big room is pretty much the brain of the central AI of the ship, and you have to put it back together, doing so being a puzzle in itself. Where it gets interesting is that this puzzle is kind of like a character creator, where you have 3 stats that need points allocated to them. These might change, but for now the 3 stats are hacking, dialogue, and combat. I want the stats to encompass the main pillars of the game, since this section should have a lasting effect on the rest of the playthrough. There are 2 data blocks that the player needs to navigate across the board and into the desired brain sockets, one block being bigger than the other. This is where the choice comes into play. Since you only have 2 data blocks and 3 brain sockets, one stat will remain at 0, the one with the smaller data block will be at level 1, and the final one then being at level 2. The player will acquire perks depending on the level of each stat. Level 1 perks being rather minor, like faster hacking or maybe a longer response time, while level 2 perks should have a bigger impact, like a security level upgrade for your hacking device, allowing you to access areas you couldn't otherwise. The enemies have also seen a little update since the last devlog. I changed it so instead of them just randomly firing projectiles, they now fire them with the beat of the music they emit. This immediately made them much more dangerous, and I really like the idea of their difficulty being tied to their assigned combat audio. When you finish putting the AI's brain back together, you can turn it on and talk to it. For this dialogue, I actually just used the normal hacking logic, because if I set it up correctly, it works pretty well straight out of the box without any additional coding required. You end up having to download the AI into your device to progress the story. This is where you acquire your perks and your companion for the rest of your journey. The final thing I worked on for this devlog is this big combat area, where all the elements and mechanics come together and make up for a pretty cool section, although the combat still needs a lot of work. Currently, the only way to fight the enemies is with this wall battery, which gets boring pretty quick. Some ideas I had that could improve the combat would be hackable distractions that an enemy would go check out, turrets that shoot anything in its path for a short while after being hacked, and maybe some other hazards the player could use to his advantage. I'm open to ideas though, so go wild in the comments. One change I made to the hacking device is that you can no longer run while holding it up. This small change, with the added addition of the timed hacking, makes for far more intense moments when you're being chased by an enemy. One small trick I made possible was that if you stop holding your device up while hacking, you can still finish your hack and run at the same time, which I find a lot of joy in for some reason. I guess it's kind of like beating the system in a way. My main goal for now is to finish the last story beat of the first level, which will also serve as the transition to the next level. When that's done, I'm gonna make this level look as good as I possibly can, or at least as good as I want the final product to look like. While I do want to make the level bigger, I think finishing it as is should give me some ideas on how big I can go in a relatively short amount of time, since my main goal with this game is to actually finish it. I already dabbled a bit with some texture work, and goddamn, can't wait to see how this game will look like in 2 weeks' time. Don't forget to like and subscribe and hit that bell notification if you don't want to miss out on the next devlog. See ya!